Now we have a quorum. I'll open this meeting, the June 17th, 2025 meeting of the Wakefield Conservation Commission is called to order. First order of business is roll call. Jennifer,
Present.
Jim, Luciani. Jim, you appear to be muted. Jim?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, and I'm present. So we have three members. Eleanor Axelrod will not be joining us tonight. We'll proceed. First order of business is the approval of the minutes for the June 3rd, 2025 meeting. Are there any comments, questions, suggestions on those minutes? I don't hear any, and I guess we need a motion to approve them.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from June 3rd.
Thank you. And we need a second.
I'll second.
Thanks, Jim. All in favor, Jennifer?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So those minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is DEP 313651 L&L Development LLC, which is now continued until July 15th, 2025 at the applicant's request. And that is it in terms of files to be reviewed at this point for any issues there. So our next item is moving down to other business. The first is DEP 313097, which is 9 Pheasantwood Drive. Request for a certificate of compliance. Ethan?
Before we get started on this one, I just wanted to ask, so I'm right across the street from this, so I think normally I would recuse myself from voting on this, but I'm also aware we have a small number of people here today to vote.
I think you'd be fine to vote because this one was more of an administrative certificate of compliance because there wasn't actually any work regulated at this property. It was just because it was part of the larger subdivision. So there wasn't any work.
Property that's actually in an upland parcel, is that correct?
Yes, it wasn't within any jurisdictional resource.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I don't see that there's any conflict in voting on this one.
Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I guess we need a motion to grant the certificate of compliance for the parcel.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Ethan, so you checked this out, right? Did I check it out with you? No.
No, this was an older one. So I went through all the paper files and it turned out there's no resources on this site. It was just part of the deed on the house.
Okay.
So this was a parcel that was part of a subdivision, part of which actually had to come before the commission for approval some years ago.
Yes, well, the larger subdivision, this was from, I think, 1988 was the order.
Okay.
So they never got the certificate of compliance. But now it's on all of the homes. So as they were trying to sell their house, they ran into this issue.
And given that they're an upland parcel with no impacts to either resources or buffers, be no reason for us to have any control over them.
Yep. Okay. And with these sort of things, it's based on the resources that were there at the time the order was issued. So I wouldn't have to do a site visit now. I just went based off of the plans, and they showed what was there at the time.
Okay. Jim, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fine. That's more than what I needed to know.
Okay,
So this is just a partial COC, just for this address.
right.
Mhm.
So that these folks can sell their house with clear title and not have an outstanding OOC on it. Okay, so we need a motion to authorize this certificate of compliance.
I'll
I'll
make
make
that.
them.
Me too.
Okay, I'll take it as Jim making the motion and Jennifer seconding then.
Mhm. Yeah.
And all in favor, Jennifer,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
and I vote in favor. So you can issue them a certificate of compliance, Ethan, and let them move on with their sale. Our next agenda item is DEP 313608, 200 to 400 Quantapowhat Parkway. And this is a change in the location of the compensatory flood storage area. And I think, if I recall correctly, Ethan, you and Jim did a site visit on this
Yep.
to look at the change.
Yep. We looked at it, and it looked fine. There's good sized tree there, some shrubs. So I think we agreed with moving it.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, what the applicant's proposing is it's a fairly small amount of compensatory storage, but can be it essentially can be moved into an area of lawn that's currently more or less lawn, as opposed to taking out native shrubs and an oak tree.
Mhm.
Am I correct?
Yep.
So, I mean, it seems like a rational step from my perspective.
Yeah. So we had a lot of discussion about this last time, but just to make sure I understand, so this is collecting water that's coming off of the construction site and holding it.
It's coming from just all the locations. It's like a permanent fixture, because the construction's closer to the lake. It provides storage for the flood water to compensate, to allow it to absorb into the ground instead of just flowing right into the lake. So this was part of the original approval. It was just moving it
Mhm.
to the side a little bit.
Yeah, okay. And this is a request for approval of a change of plans that doesn't affect the order of conditions. Like the order of conditions can stay as they are, and that's why it's not coming in as a request for an amended order.
Correct. It was just a slight movement,
Mm-hmm.
more so making it official just to note it when it comes time that the work
Mm-hmm.
finishes.
Okay.
So how large a volume are they providing storage for? Do you know?
I think it was 6 cubic yards. Or
Yeah, it's not
no.
all that much water, but
No, it isn't.
interesting. So that was the amount of storage they were deemed to have displaced.
It was a better alternative, though. It's
Oh, it
they're
looks
right.
like from
The
I
vegetation.
didn't actually go see the site, but you're right. It looks like a much better alternative than taking out the
Mm-hmm.
native vegetation and the oak.
Yeah, the building's pretty far back from the lake, so I don't think it was in the flood zone that much, despite the size of it.
Hmm. This one, as I recall, took a long time for us to process. Um, so do we need do we need a motion to accept the change in the location of the compensatory storage then? Is that how we would do this? Or
I,
accept the modified plan as proposed by the applicant?
I think a motion to accept the change would be enough. It was pretty simple approval, but I think a motion would cover it.
Okay.
And the you showed the plan last time in the previous meeting, and so that would now become part of their plan documents.
It wouldn't be altering the order, but because it's just such a minor
Mhm.
change. It's something that they could do,
Yeah.
could have done on their own, but came to us to just get our
Mhm.
approval before it was done.
Okay, yeah. I'm just wondering if because we saw the figure last time,
Mhm.
and spent time looking at it last time. So that figure would become part of their plan documents?
It wouldn't be part of the order, but when it comes
Okay.
time to review it, you would look at it and understand that it's matches pretty close to what the plan shows. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's something they would show us and then sort of walk us through and say, we just moved it to the side for these reasons. But
Mm-hmm.
they're just coming to us before they do that because of the nature of the project.
Okay.
But that's a good question. I looked at that this week, if it would be an amendment, but not in this case.
We don't have to go through the amendment process.
No.
So I guess we can accept the applicant's modification, the location of the compensatory storage with as a reasonable minor change to the project plan.
Yep, that would work.
Okay. So we need a motion to that effect.
Okay. Jennifer, you can do it.
Okay, I'll make a motion to accept the applicant's proposed minor change to the compensatory flood storage area
Yeah, that's good.
as
I think
proposed.
that works.
I'll second that.
Thanks. And all in favor? I'm going to reverse order. Jim,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay. So that takes care of Quannapowitt Parkway.
Good.
Yeah. Next is the wetlands bylaw.
I'll share my screen.
Okay. Oh, so this is actually the presentation rather than the bylaw that we're dealing with.
Yeah, yes, it's I'm just walking through some of the edits that were made from the last meeting and in the last 2 weeks.
Okay. Um, we also have to, once Eleanor's back, we actually have to decide to adopt the bylaw or to at least vote in favor of it to take it to various boards, town meeting, and all of that, right?
Would that be a vote or just something you do?
I think you'd probably want to have some of the public hearings first,
Okay.
if you're going to make any changes, and then you could, at the end of the summer or whenever that wraps up, then you could take a vote. I think that would be
So
reasonable.
how do we conduct these public hearings? I mean, I know there's the planning board meeting coming up in July. Do we basically hold a separate public hearing of
I
our
think,
own, Judy?
yeah, I think what you could do is hold a special hearing and invite, Eleanor had mentioned FOLQ and Saugus River Watershed Environmental Sustainability. I think it makes more sense to have it all at one meeting, because if different groups pose things all in one forum, then it
Mhm.
can be more of a back and forth. I think it would be more productive rather
Okay.
than going to those other boards' meetings separately.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's reasonable for us to make a presentation to our planning board colleagues
Yes, absolutely.
and give them a chance to
Correct.
view
Yeah,
and
no, I
comment.
agree.
But
I
but
think so.
I think you're right. I think if we can bring together the advocacy groups and get their thinking in one
Right,
place rather than doing a round robin.
right, because then once you narrow it down a little bit, edit it out a little, then maybe early fall, you could have another like a final public forum
Okay.
and fine tune it, to the.
So we would invite those groups to come to the public
Yeah,
forum as
yeah.
well as the
I
broader
just think it
public.
makes more sense, because I think it'd be difficult to try to arrange you going to their meetings or they're coming to yours, overlapping schedules. I think
Mhm.
it would just be like a one fell swoop.
Yeah.
I think it would just give people other ideas to think about that might form some different opinions. So I think that might be helpful.
Okay. I think I should discuss this with Eleanor since she seems to have the connections to those groups.
Well, the commission could actually reach out to, pick a date that works for you and then reach out to them and say, this is when we're having it. And kind of control it, because otherwise it could turn into back and forth for a while with people wanting certain dates. So I think it's easier if the commission sets a date.
Okay. I'd like to have Eleanor present for
Yeah,
that
no,
decision. But I have a pretty good sense of my own schedule for the summer, but
yeah,
no sense of anyone else's. So
yeah. And it might have to be later in the summer maybe. But I think you might get some good ideas from the planning board, as a good starting point.
yeah. Right. Okay. So let's look at what you've changed, Ethan.
Yep. This was from last meeting. I'll just add this into the slide, just making it more clear that there's no additional fees.
Is it WPA forms?
Uh, Probably fees. Yeah.
There it could be
Ethan,
forms and then no additional fees above WPA
Hmm.
fees.
Oh yeah, additional.
So the first fees maybe is the next fees, that should be forms on top of WPA forms and fees. It's another way to do it.
Are we having an additional form though? I don't recall.
If they're if they're proposing something that isn't protected under the WPA, we're going to need a form of our own, aren't we?
Yeah.
You can still have
Just
your
take-
own form, even if it's one that's within the WPA. Other towns do that. It's a one page. And I
Okay.
think that makes the paperwork easier, because otherwise you're trying to cut and paste in the state forms. So I think a
Okay.
simplified, you could, plenty of towns have them. You could have a simplified form
All
that would
right.
all be in the same file. I mean, it's something to think about.
Okay. So you would take out the paperwork
Yeah.
and no additional filing fees on top of WPA fees.
Mm. That's mentioned again later, I think.
Right. You need to
Ethan,
get
I
rid of
have a
the extra
question.
space before the word improve on this slide, though, Ethan.
Mm,
And
oh,
the
I see
third
that.
bullet.
Very good.
Thank you.
Ethan, I have a question for you. You put codifies 25-foot no disturb policy. Is that, can that be modified at our discretion? I mean, we allowed the ability to change that if we felt it was deserved to be changed?
The slide, you mean?
The 25-foot distance,
When
or is that
it
extra
comes
stuff?
to writing a permit, you're saying?
I'm asking if that's a set value, you can't do anything else, or can the board decide that it can waive that restriction?
I believe our bylaw does allow for um like doing work inside of that as long as you prove that it doesn't have an additional impact on the resource. But that's something I noted here was you might want some sort of standard or language or of how you can offset that work. If there's a certain amount of plantings or square footing. But that's important to make sure you note and something we could look at in the bylaw again if we had to.
Yeah, there is a section of the bylaw. I could read it if you want,
Yeah,
but it's pretty broad.
What does it say?
yeah, could you read it?
Okay. Strict compliance with this chapter may be waived when, in the sole judgment of the commission, such action is in the public interest and is consistent with the intent and purpose of the chapter. In addition, any person may request a waiver by submitting a waiver request to the commission in writing. The waiver request shall be presented at the time of filing the application, along with a written justification stating why a waiver is desired or needed, is in the public benefit, or otherwise is in the interest of justice, and is consistent with the intent and purpose of the chapter. In evaluating whether a waiver shall be granted, the commission shall consider whether there are any practicable alternatives to the proposed project with less adverse impacts upon the resource areas protected by this chapter. The commission may require the applicant to conduct an analysis of alternatives to show there are no practicable alternatives.
Okay.
So it sounds like you can allow work within there.
We can.
Yeah, it requires a specific
Specific
written
request and a
written
specific
request.
action on our part to actually
Yes.
allow it.
Yeah.
And the one thing I was thinking was that should we be codifying the need for mitigation as part of that? Would we want to add some language to that that simply gives us the ability to require the applicant to provide additional mitigation?
Yeah, I think the mitigation sort of, if you go, 5 feet into the buffer, you can agree to do some plantings just to mitigate that. It's not always a replication, but something to kind of just meet in the middle with the commission on.
Right. But it seems to me that the way what Jennifer just read to us doesn't really say one way or the other whether we have the ability to require that mitigation, does it? Or does it? And
I think in the setback section, there's more information,
okay.
maybe. I'll see if I have it here. So this goes into more detail about the setback, but then it also says the presumption is rebuttable, showing a clear showing that you'll prevent any negative impacts on the resource.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think you're pointing out something that is a little bit unique, Paul, that it's the waiver covers alternatives to the proposed work, but not necessarily compensation. Like, okay, we'll let you do this if you make this improvement over in this area or on this aspect.
But you could develop performance standards like they have in the, for a notice of intent. So that when someone applies, they know exactly if they want a setback that's shorter, then they'll know exactly what they need to do to overcome that.
Yeah.
So that they can get the waiver.
Well, this one looks like it's showing that there's a 25-foot setback unless you prove you won't impact the resource. Then you can go into the setback. It's not even saying that you need mitigation. It looks like what it says is that all you have to do is show that you're not going to impact the resource. So it kind of makes the setback seem a little looser.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe what we want is to add some language here that would allow us to require mitigation measures.
But if you're saying it's not going to alter anything, why do you need a mitigation?
You wouldn't, it's not going to alter anything. And if the commission agrees to that, if you agree that it's not going to alter anything.
Okay.
Well, what if someone wanted to say cut down a tree that provides canopy and they said, we're not necessarily going to replace the tree, but we'll plant native plantings. So they would still be doing the alteration to the resource area, but it would be compensated in some other way.
Isn't that taken care of in the tree bylaw, the tree
policy?
policy?
Right, but it has the same kind of standards. it's discretionary to the commission
Hmm.
because you
I-
can't plant a 30-foot tree.
Right.
So it's been accepted that a combination of a shrubs and a tree that's like a 6-inch caliper, something like that is acceptable. It's not going to replace the canopy, but it does provide mitigation.
Right.
I think to what Jim is saying, that if they're not going to impact the resource, why would you want mitigation? But I think the mitigation is just what we were just part of the bylaw was to get a little extra,
Mhm.
plantings in there. Not that it was required, but you could require it if you wanted to.
Well, that would
Hmm.
actually make sense because this is supposed to be a more restrictive regulation that we're adding here, so that would make sense.
You
I
know,
think
we could, sorry.
I think that was the goal here, but it may have just gotten lost in the process.
Mhm.
I'm just looking at this sentence that begins, the presumption is rebuttable and may be overcome upon a clear showing the nature of the proposed work, special design measures, construction controls, and maybe here we insert mitigation, impact mitigation measures or site conditions will prevent a negative impact on the resource area. Would that work in terms?
Yeah, I think adding just a little part of that sentence would be good.
Yeah,
Something like what you're
something,
saying, or you could say plus appropriate mitigation or anything you add, you kind of have to expand even more. Like if you said mitigation, you would need some sort of benchmark of what that means, almost like a small performance standard.
mm-hmm,
So I'll work on adding that, I think,
okay,
and trying to get a complete
that
part
sounds
going.
good. Okay, thanks. I guess we can go back to the presentation then.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to pull something together this week and last week, but it was you add one thing and then three more things change with how intertwined it is.
Yeah, yeah.
It wasn't
Yeah.
exactly the easiest.
And this isn't the state law, this is just our own bylaw, so.
Yep.
So I think that then that offers us the where you've highlighted here about offsetting the work in the buffer zone with mitigation.
Yeah.
Um,
This was sort of another instance of maybe looking at the bylaw again with the definition for bank. And I'll go to the next slide.
Ethan, where can I see the most recent version of the bylaw?
The website has it under
Okay.
forms and policies.
Is that the June 3rd one? Or is there something more recent?
The bylaw was a little older, not the not the presentation,
Okay.
the bylaw itself.
Okay, I found it.
So this is the definition from our bylaw, and the difference to the Wetlands Protection Act is that this one says whichever is higher instead of lower, but something that I came to notice was how much of a difference that would actually make.
Mhm.
So changing under the bylaw, it would essentially make the bank expand all the way to the mean annual flood level because that
Hmm.
almost always is higher than the bank.
Mhm.
So you'd see in a case like this,
Yeah.
it would turn this whole blue area essentially into a bank, which is quite different from like the physical
Is the
bank that you would
is this
think of.
the bottom of Quantapowhat?
Yes.
Hmm.
Or the next slide, I had another example that was a little more drastic, where you change the bank from this dashed orange area to this whole blue part. Um,
Hmm.
and doing work in the bank is going to be a little different, if not a lot harder, than just in the flood zone.
So the bylaw definition expands the bank?
Yes.
To this whole to anything that would ever get flooded
instead of the observable break and slope, which is more of like you see on this slide, like this part here where
Yeah,
it
that's the
breaks,
break
where
and slope. That's the bank, top
you
of
think of a
bank.
bank, or even in this diagram here, it would expand it to the floodplain, the 100-year floodplain, because it's the higher one.
Hmm.
I think in some cases it would be good, like if you want more protections, but it might be a little too much.
But is this blue area, Ethan,
Mhm.
the 100-year flood area or the mean annual flood area for this stream? I
It's the
mean,
same thing,
I
pretty
would
much.
think mean annual flood level would be much lower than 100-year flood.
No, so in this case, it references the same thing. And the mean annual flood level is based on like a 10-year. It's a little complicated because it's not something that's usually in the Wetlands Protection Act that much. But
What
they
is
both reference the same thing, I've come to understand.
what is it? What do the regulations say when they talk about the individual bank? Do they give you tell you what the object is of putting the regulations on bank? I mean, that usually gives you an idea of
Like the performance standards part of
yeah,
that.
performance standards. Yeah.
Let me see, I was looking at that today.
Well, the habitat, when they talk about bank, is like tunneling into the bank, like the muddy portion of the bank.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So this would be a totally different,
Yeah, we're not trying to take over regulation of large areas of the
yeah, like
town.
bordering land subject to flooding. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think
But see,
something
the
like,
presumption might, well, what Ethan just said is, what do they have for standards? Because it tells you right there what you're trying to protect.
Right.
yeah, and looking at it, I think the standards would sort of prevent a lot from happening. Like, I mean, the stability you can sort of offset if it's a flat ground, but something like the capacity for breeding habitat, that's something that you would be affecting by, building a house or something.
Mhm.
And there's already standards for that flood zone. It's not that you can just do anything, but this would be stricter.
And the bank generally, I mean, you wouldn't allow something up to the bank anyways.
Yeah, because it would be kind of easy to affect the bank, and if you're building right up to it anyways.
I mean, what we're talking about here is top of bank, right?
Yes, the how to
We're
define where the
trying
top
to
of the bank
define top of
starts.
bank. And then the Wetlands Protection Act imposes, because a bank is a bank for a body of water, whether that's a lake, a pond, a stream of some sort, river, creek,
Well,
whatever. We're talking about the we're talking about actual flowing or stationary water, right?
Yeah, the bank is essentially the whole part from where the water ends, being the lower boundary, to the
Lower
top,
boundary to the
which is the
top
upper. The
of where
bank is
the
that whole.
slope breaks.
Yep.
Okay.
But what we're talking about, as you're saying, is the top of the bank because it affects where the bank
And then
exists.
the Wetlands Protection Act protects 100 feet back from
it's
that if it's
only
a
on the
lake
street.
and 200 feet back if it's a river. Am I correct in that?
It's yes, there's the regulations. Maybe not protect, but there's that buffer zone, definitely.
Right. Okay, this buffer zone.
I guess something I didn't think of was that also extends the buffer zone. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but
Is
that
there
would be
buffer
another
zones?
issue as well.
So this would, if the bylaw continues to have, adopt a different standard than the WPA, then that means things that currently fall under the WPA, we would then be on top of that applying a more protective, standard, right, under the
Mhm.
bylaw.
Yes, it would be more protective, but I think it's almost too protective to the point where it's kind of not, you shouldn't really be having it in there. I think it's like
Yeah.
too protective.
I think
Some of the, especially the other image that you showed, would that land or that difference, would that fall under land subject to flooding, which is also in the Bible?
Um, it
Like, would
it
this
already
be?
does fall under that, and it's still would.
this
Um,
development already is on land subject to flooding.
yeah, you can do development in that area. You just need to sort of offset it in certain ways. In this case, that some of this may have been done before.
Mm-hmm.
Standards, I'm not sure, but
Is that
Wouldn't
water?
be surprising.
that's part of what the compensatory flood storage that we just talked about is for.
Right, right. Is this New Salem Street going off sort of at the diagonal?
That is, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
So that all of those were built before there were wetland standards.
right.
Yeah. I
No
knew a
big
couple
surprise.
areas that had a lot of a widespread flood plain, so I chose this one as an example.
Yeah. So this is all within something that's even less than 100-year floodplain. This is like a 10-year recurrence interval.
This is 100 year. Well,
Okay.
what I was saying about mean annual flood level is
Mhm.
the way they usually look at it is sort of an average. It's kind of complicated. It comes out to essentially the same as the 100 year flood level.
Really?
It's just not,
That
I
can't
think
be.
the word's a little misleading.
Okay, so mean annual flood level doesn't means mostly the same as 100-year flood level.
Yes, it would be essentially the same.
All right.
I believe exactly
I
the
don't
same.
think we want to step into the role of regulating all development that's currently within the 100-year floodplain if it's pre-existing and all of that.
Yeah, this would only sort of regulate work or new projects, but it would
Mm-hmm.
put it under the regulations of a bank, which is a lot more difficult to do work because you
Mm-hmm.
typically don't see any work in a bank, just with the
Yeah,
nature of how those exist.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So if we harmonize the bylaw definition of bank with the WPA, this area that you're showing would still be regulated, but under different standards,
Right.
conformance standards.
Yeah, it would just be regulated under the Wetlands Protection Act. Um,
Because what,
I think it would almost just be best to remove it, or I don't think there's really middle ground here.
Well, we could go back to the whichever is lower, which is
Yeah,
what WPA says,
because
yeah.
Or
what,
whichever is higher.
instead of whichever is higher.
Mhm.
Whichever is higher is what would impose this large blue area. The whichever is lower would give you that cross-hatched area that runs down essentially along the stream.
Yes, but because the only change that we had was that one word, I think
Hmm.
just removing that definition altogether is kind of how you would, because it would just default to
Just
the Wetlands Protection Act.
remove the notion of bank.
Well, anything not defined in the bylaw, it just is sort of defined under the Wetlands Protection Act. So it would still be,
Mhm.
unless you wanted to also put it under the bylaw.
I don't think there's any reason to duplicate it if we intend for it to be exactly
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
If,
this
if
is
our
a
intent
good,
is to
So we had a lot of words that we didn't define, like land underwater. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just is defaults to the Wetlands Protection Act
right,
definition. Yeah.
which is pretty self-evident actually.
Mm.
Um, okay.
so I'm trying to understand now. So this would still be jurisdictional to the bylaw, meaning that potentially as a land under flooding, land subject to flooding. So that means potentially this might be subject to the 25-foot setback or would require a waiver.
I believe all resource areas under the Wetlands Protection Act are also jurisdictional to the bylaw. Yes.
Yeah, and we definitely name land subject to flooding in the bylaw as a resource area.
Yes.
Mm.
Yep.
So
I
this
don't
would be regulated by the bylaw with a 25-foot setback. As
Yes,
it's
I don't
written.
think the land subject to flooding would have a setback, because that doesn't usually have a buffer, but the
Mhm.
bank would. Yep.
So if you recap this whole thing, I'm kind of confused now as to where we are.
I think we're going to just remove our definition of bank, which would make it default to the Wetland Protection Act definition,
Yep.
which I think is pretty, it covers in what it needs to cover. But it would still be protected by the bylaw and have that 25-foot buffer.
Oh, I thought you said it. I thought you said it wouldn't because a land subject to flooding doesn't.
The bank would have the buffer. Land
Mhm.
subject to flooding would not,
Mm-hmm.
but the bank would. Yep.
Mhm.
So our buffer zone definition is lands within 100 feet of specific resource areas and within 200 feet of rivers and streams.
Mhm.
So land subject to flooding wouldn't be considered like a specific resource area.
Did we name them? I just know in the Wetlands Protection Act, it's not, it doesn't have a buffer. That's just what I was referencing.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, that's what it says for buffer zone, within 100 feet of specific resource areas.
And within 200 feet of river and streams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we don't mention what the specific resources are.
Well, I think that land subject to flooding is listed as a resource area. So section 2 jurisdiction says the following resource areas, and land subject to flooding or inundation by ground or surface water is listed as a resource area.
I was thinking it sounds like using the word specific makes it seem like it would go onto the list which ones would have the buffer zone.
Okay.
That would be a huge area if you had a buffer around the floodplain as well.
Yeah. What we've got here is no person shall build and alter the following resource areas, any perennial stream, blah. Any, is that supposed to be a colon then? After the words riverfront area, then it's any, and there's a semicolon, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Just reading. I presume that's just a typo. Any bank, so we still regulate bank as it's defined in Wetlands Protection Act. Freshwater, wetland, marsh, wet meadow. Okay.
I mean, is that the sort of thing we could also specify in regulations as a performance standard that, like, land subject to flooding, we don't have a setback, something like that?
Yeah, I think where you said specific resource areas, we could go on instead of saying specific, we could just list the ones that have buffers.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Which I think what we're doing is we're just matching it with the Wetlands Protection Act, as far as what has buffers or doesn't.
That isn't it work that way anyways?
What's that?
Yes,
Okay,
that's
so-
how it works.
Okay.
Okay. I think we're all set with that one. I'll
Okay.
put some of that
So,
together.
so how did we end up with this? So the bank is gonna be not related to,
We're
I
we're
mean,
not we're removing the term bank, the
right,
definition two in our is being deleted. Is that what I'm getting?
Yes.
So we've renumbered everything else moves up one.
Yep. And then expanding on that specific resource areas section to name the exact resources.
And which section is that?
10.54.
That was in the buffer zone where it says
Buffer
specific.
zone. Lands within 100 feet of specific resource areas and 200 feet of rivers and streams.
Just so we can list exactly which resource areas, like Jennifer said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, like we both said.
Hey,
And then in this section, just noting that there is some protection under the Clean Water Act for isolated vegetated wetlands, just to be more clear on this part.
Where are you now, Ethan?
Oh, on the
Sorry.
isolated
I'm
vegetated
sorry.
wetlands.
I was looking at our bylaw.
Oh, sorry. I was just moving on to the next slide, if we're all set.
Isolated veg is freshwater not because they do not border a body of water under the Clean Water Act, which is federal law.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. I believe there's some protection. They're not, it's
Let's
not,
not count on any of that for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
It might be good to say that it's federal, so we can
Under the
understand
federal
what that
Clean
is.
Water Act, yeah, just because.
yeah. And this was just so we're not like pretending like there's nothing or just sort of
Mhm.
putting the right information out there.
Yeah, that's fine. If it's at least 1,000 square feet.
So I think this section could just use a little kind of refining it or giving it some better information. It seems like there's not exactly a clear path to demonstrating that a ponding is not a vernal pool, from what I'm seeing. So it seems like doing so would kind of take a couple years of monitoring a site, which I guess is possible, but not what someone would be doing if they're doing a project. If you get what I'm kind of saying.
Well, I mean, the question I would ask is, can we accept any one of these? In which case, a lot of applicants are going to jump to number three, to the third bullet.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, what it's saying is if they're presented one of these, the commission will consider it. So it's not even saying that this will guarantee it. It's just saying that you need this just for the commission to consider it.
right.
But
So
all
it's
of
not,
the options are at least a few years to determine it.
yeah.
All but the last one. The last one could be something that,
No, but that one says most years, and it's defined, most years is defined up above as 3 out of 5 consecutive years.
okay. Yep. I missed that as I sped through it.
Because it's kind of a tricky thing to do because establishing something as a vernal pool is a little simpler whereas
Mhm.
doing the opposite is not as simple.
Well, I mean, that's the objective of trying to protect them.
Yeah.
Is this something that other towns have adopted? Pretty much like this?
I don't think they really go into detail on it.
I want to look at whether this is part of the MAC template. Do you know, Ethan, off the top of your head, is this part of the MAC template bylaw?
I think this is, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay,
But I noticed that sometimes the Mac template is a little more restrictive just because that's the nature of the work they do.
right. That's understandable.
But we don't exactly have the background of like when they wrote that. We didn't know the exact reasoning or additional information or research behind that. So it seems like a little
Yeah, I mean, unless,
much.
yeah, most proposed developments do not. I mean, I suppose we could essentially, this would require that there would at least be several years of data gathering before anyone proposes development in an area where there's a vernal pool,
Yeah. I think usually
or
it
where
would
there
be,
is something that is deemed a vernal pool.
mhm. I think typically if someone says it's a vernal pool, they would have to prove it. So if the commission was saying it, they would have to provide the evidence um, instead of it being the applicant. I think usually that's how people do it.
Yeah.
Because in that case, if you have that presumption, then there's something there that you noticed that you could present.
Mhm.
Right, that's a good point. If it's an area where the commission had previously thought there was a vernal pool, I mean, there are some spots where I know Rebecca had done some work and had some pictures. The pools were never certified, but it could be things like that if the
Mhm.
commission had witnessed something in the past to come to that conclusion. But I think it would still be a very limited number of filings where you'd see activity in near a vernal pool.
Yeah.
With what's left in town.
Yeah, and I think what Ethan said probably hits the nail on the head because the burden of proof flips to us, and that's when we really have the problems because we don't have the science to back it up. I don't know where you get the science for what you've written.
Yeah. And it mentions a qualified independent reviewer, but I'm not sure
Yeah,
what makes someone qualified if you're just like taking pictures of the area.
yeah.
Qualified wetland scientist.
Well, by the time, if you have to wait 2 years to get it certified or whatever it is, I mean, in 2 years it could change from the way it is now too. I mean, it's a time, and you don't know when the time is going to start or stop. It could change. So you may be looking at something totally different than when you started it and not qualified.
Jim, what are you suggesting? We delete this then, or?
I think, I don't know. Jennifer, what do you think on it?
Gosh, let me think.
I'll tell you something. The
Mhm.
thing that bothers me the most is when this thing goes to DEP and they flip everything to us. We've never really gotten a lot of support that way.
But the bylaw wouldn't go to DEP.
No, I'm just saying, oh, it wouldn't?
No, it goes to Superior Court.
Okay, so
You mean an
but the
appeal
burden
of
is
the
still on
bylaw.
us, right?
Right,
The
right.
burden
So,
is still on us.
right. So off-season of vernal pool, I mean, there are certain indicators, the depression, you could see the hydric soils, but then you have to really get down to try to find scraps of like an egg mass or little remnants from what had been inhabitant there. And I think
Yeah.
that's incredibly difficult. So I think it could look like it may be, but I think it's a tough thing unless you're an actual wetland scientist who has experience with vernal pools that could find the minute remnants of something that had lived there. So I think it's a very difficult hurdle to overcome for most, unless, I mean, a larger scale project, it's different. They have a large budget.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
if you look, like the Mass GIS, it has a couple of areas where it's a presumed vernal pool. So I think that, I mean, you could go by that. And those are like areas under the power lines, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as developed as Wakefield is, you're less likely to find an abundance of vernal pools.
Yeah, and I mean, some of this, you talk about chemical and biological, and that's all stuff that takes time to evaluate. I really think you don't need this like this.
I wonder if we just remove this part and then we start from with just this sentence. I mean, this could be something decent to have. I mean, that might be all we need here.
So if we didn't have this, then I guess how would that work if someone submitted an application and they, let's say, attested, or they just didn't select vernal pool as something that's on their property, but we think based on what we know about the area that there is a vernal pool there. What would happen then?
I think what would happen is you'd sort of just have to deny the project, because this was made to use in that exact situation, but it just wasn't the greatest way to do it.
Don't you have to check for vernal pools at the right time of year?
This is just talking about vernal pools that have not been certified.
Right. But yes, the answer, Jim, is yes. You're only going to encounter vernal pools in the spring.
Yeah.
The early spring, it's essentially between melt and when things
Okay.
dry out.
So you're calling it a vernal pool, even though it doesn't really.
Well,
This is sort of the commission looks at it and thinks, I think this is a vernal pool.
yeah,
Well,
and
see, it's really not. You're certifying something that.
Well,
Well, I mean, we
map
ran into that,
template.
Jim, at the Volk, didn't we? There
At
were
the boat,
areas.
yeah, at the boat, we probably lost the vernal pool.
I think we did.
I'll get down there and see if it came back, because we don't know if their system isn't all in place right now.
Right.
We don't know if they're getting water to the places they used to get it. But
Well,
Right, but
right.
you did have a vernal pool certified there. You had a wetland
Yeah.
site.
Yes.
yeah, but the one I'm
That's part
talking
of the
about is
process.
the one I'm talking about, Judy, is the same one that Eleanor was talking about. And Elaine was talking about it.
Didn't the scientists say that wasn't a certifiable vernal pool? Wasn't that the one?
I don't.
I mean, they did the whole area.
I can tell you this. I was up there too, and there was enough frog.
Right, but it has, they were, right, but there's more than one criteria.
I
Yeah,
thought
no,
the one at
no.
I thought the one at the Voc was certifiable, but was still not covered under the WPA.
Yeah,
If
that
it-
was the
because it
problem.
wasn't
We don't have a bylaw. We did not have a
Right.
bylaw at the
But it
time.
wasn't certified.
And the
right.
WPA, because the WPA doesn't protect vernal pools.
But you know something? When you say that, I keep thinking that you're saying a vernal pool is the same thing as a pond, as a puddle of water. Which is what's
No.
the distinction?
Well, that's essentially what this. I think for the purposes of overcoming the presumption of a vernal pool habitat, the commission will consider evidence presented by a qualified independent reviewer.
But adding the
You have
word
to add some words
independent,
here.
does that mean that
Sorry?
by adding the word independent, that means you don't want someone that the applicant is having review it? So you want to get an outside consultant? Is that what you're saying? Because if the applicant hires a wetland scientist to give them the information, I mean, I would think that would be enough. They're certified.
So just a qualified reviewer is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, I mean, I
Why
don't know
we
that you would need that
change it
independent.
to a qualified wetland scientist?
Do they have
But
I'm
what are
not
they,
sure if there's qualifications for that exactly.
Yeah, you'd have to have standards, what you,
yeah, I mean, what are they gonna check for? What are they, I mean,
They're going to
They
check
check-
for the elements that make up a vernal pool,
but
right?
we, but we know we don't have that because otherwise, I don't know if this makes sense to me.
Could say
Are you suggesting we not want to regulate vernal pools, Jimmy?
No, I think if it's too small, it's too small. And I don't see, that you have to start somewhere. And that's what they started with. We have a thing down there for 1,000 square feet. Where did that number come from?
We borrowed it from a couple of the towns, as I recall.
I mean, how do they know? That's another thing you're gonna stumble on with this. How do they, how do they treat that if they're challenged?
mean,
They say,
I
oh, we
think
just put it out of the top of my head and.
I believe the state deems it as what, a quarter acre foot?
No, that's the Wetlands Protection Act is a 1/4 acre foot.
Right. That's the WPA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have problems with this. I mean, I think it could be worked on, but I don't know what we're trying. We're trying to capture that one that we might miss is what seems to be.
I think we're trying to capture the vernal pools that aren't being protected by the state.
Well, that's
I mean, the whole objective of this bylaw is to provide
But don't keep
enhanced
calling them vernal
protection
pools.
resources,
Paul.
right?
Don't keep calling them vernal pool because it's really not.
Well,
Well,
Mac does call them vernal pools that are not covered under the WPA.
I mean, they could be vernal pools, Jimmy, just because they're not as big as what the WPA covers doesn't necessarily rule them out from being vernal pools.
Well,
I mean, size is not the only criterion.
no, I know it's not. It's the animals that are in there.
Right.
Yeah, and you know there's certain things like you can't have fish in there and stuff like that. I know that describes a vernal pool.
Right.
so if the commission looks at a project and vernal pool isn't listed, and the commission thinks there's a vernal pool present, what is it going to be a set of criteria that will allow the commission to make that determination? Will they have to will the commission have to present information to say, we believe it's a vernal pool and this is why?
Yeah.
I think what this section was doing was like what Judy was saying. For if the commission said there's a vernal pool, it's helping the applicant understand what do I have to do to prove it's not. But a better alternative might be that the commission would have to provide evidence of a vernal pool.
No,
Well, you'd have to provide some criteria.
we,
Whether,
we,
you know, you would-
we'd have
we
to
have a
provide
definition.
criteria much like the criteria in the Wetlands Protection Act.
right, but for a site-specific area, you couldn't just say, we think it is. There would have to be some kind of, we've heard wood frogs, or we've seen, the caddisfly egg, something like that, not just there's a depression that there's leaf staining and it's hydric soils.
Yeah.
Well,
That's what I'm saying.
there is a definition that probably provides some criteria like that. So the definition in the bylaw is a confined basin or depression, not occurring in lawns, gardens, landscapes, or driveways, which in most years holds water for a minimum of 2 continuous months in the spring or summer, at least 200 cubic feet of water at some point during most years, free of adult predatory fish populations, an essential breeding ground, regardless of whether the site has been certified.
Right, but outside of the season when you certify, which is like March, April.
Yeah.
If the commission made a determination in September and said, we think this is a vernal pool, you'd need to base it on something. You couldn't just say, it looks like it's a depression that would be one. That's what I'm saying, because I think that would be an area where you'd open yourself up to appeal. Because the first question would be, well, where's the evidence you're basing this on?
Yeah, because one person would say there is a vernal pool, the other would say there isn't. So what this slide is for is to kind of break that standstill. Who's right in this case?
Right, correct.
I don't know if there's even is an exact answer other than one side would have to sort of just forfeit their
Mm.
Seems
believe.
to me that the presumption should be that the applicant has to demonstrate it's not,
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah,
which is essentially what we're saying here.
well, the applicant does have to do that, but
Okay.
again, I sound like a broken record, but if it gets appealed, then we have to play this game where now we're struggling to find something.
Right, but what I'm trying to understand is if someone comes in outside of the season and says
Yeah.
there isn't a vernal pool, and the commission says, yes, there is, we think there is,
Yeah,
are they going to be then mandated to get an independent reviewer, which is fine, that's the
Yeah.
commission's discretion. But I think there should be some basis for the commission to request that.
okay.
Yeah, because you're right about it being on the applicant's, it's their presumption to overcome, but you
Right,
still have to tell them how they can do that.
right, right. So it's not just, well, we think it is, you go figure it out.
Now, I guess, Ethan, would you, for an application, would you do a site visit and give an impression? I mean, could that be part of the process?
Yeah, I could certainly help the commission get a sense of if I think this may or may not be a vernal pool.
Mm.
Kind of what we would do now. We just don't really encounter that often. But if you believe it is a vernal pool, then what are the next steps?
Mhm. I mean, I don't think it's great, reliable evidence, but I mean, these hearings are public, neighbors could come.
Mm.
Yeah.
But there'd have to be documented evidence too. It could, I mean, I guess you could,
It's not really a very reliable way to form an impression like that.
mm,
Yeah.
I think
yeah,
what
just
would
verbal
work is
confirmation.
if it comes that you think there's a vernal pool, you could sort of make an agreement with the applicant for them to hire an independent reviewer. But what you need to cover yourself for is if they say they don't want to do that. I don't think we'll ever have this issue anytime soon, but just something to,
It's in the bylaw and essentially the same language that you just deleted here.
Mm.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
I think the way it reads now is fine, and I think Ethan's right. It's not going to be an overwhelming occurrence. So it would just have to be something that the commission takes on a case-by-case
Mhm.
discretionary, but using, their best evidence to support it, whether it's something they've observed before or
mhm.
characteristics.
Yeah. Well, that would be one way to do it. I mean, chances of coming across like we did at the Voc, uh, again in Wakefield, I think is slim. But
No, that was a huge parcel, so that's the
Yeah.
It
difference.
was a lot of
But you
land.
used up
Yeah.
all your chances on the vote, so
Yeah, right.
can't go back.
yeah, you know, yeah, it'd be interesting to see once they finish this thing if where the water's going.
Yeah. That will be an interesting place to
Yeah.
look at.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got some language here that we can live with for the moment.
Yep.
All right.
Are we gonna look at this again, or is this it?
We can
No,
we
we'll look
can
at it.
we can continue to work through it. I mean, I'm assuming that whoever goes to the planning board will do something like this presentation.
Well, that would be you
I'm assuming it's going to be me and maybe one other person.
and Ethan.
Okay.
Eleanor said she was available, but we have
Okay.
another
Well, maybe it
meeting.
would be good for two of us to go. It's
Yeah.
not a bad thing.
Yep,
So,
we
okay.
could all go for that matter.
Sorry.
You could all go for that matter. So
Well,
yeah, the more the better, I guess. I don't,
Yeah. We have another meeting before that anyways, so
right.
to work on it and could do all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go on to the next one then,
All right.
which is the next slide, I think, from what I can see on my
Um,
screen, Ethan.
setback, we talked about this one already.
Yeah.
And then this was just some more info about mitigation in case we
Yeah.
wanted to go the route of going into more detail, but I think we had it covered,
Okay.
or maybe not.
Well, I definitely support the idea of performance standards so that this is, provide some reliability to how this is carried out.
Right. And I think unless we come forward with other standards, it should be those set forth in the WPA. I think that's
Yeah.
appropriate.
Yeah, I think just a little reference to the WPA and how they do mitigation would be all we need for
Mhm.
this.
Right.
Because this one applies to the setback as well.
Yep. Why don't
Well,
you
it's general.
also look at how we need to address that in the bylaw then, Ethan?
Yeah, I think that was the main part of that I was thinking. It might be something more to address in the bylaw.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay.
I'll tie that in with what we talked about with the setbacks.
Right. Okay.
This was just a new slide, I believe.
What is an alteration? Cutting trees and removing bridges, extending lawns. Hmm.
Just some more information I added. I think it's fine to stay because we do mention alterations a good amount.
Okay. So,
I think that's a great idea. Because it's
Mm.
easy to imagine those in the everyday, an average homeowner project.
Right. Because what we're regulating is buffer area essentially.
Right.
Yeah. Well, even I think a lot of people might not understand that they can't do work like in a stream too. You might see people building bridges.
yeah.
Like it's obvious to say you can't alter the resource, but to the average homeowner might not see it as an alteration. So
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
tying that all in together.
Yeah.
So do you want to say installing structures in or over a stream?
I have them both, I think.
Oh, redirecting or impeding water
Oh,
flow,
and I see what you're saying. Yeah.
just in or over.
In. Yeah.
Okay. No, I think it's useful it's a useful set of examples.
Yeah, and probably stream or pond, right? Stream or pond, because
Yeah.
that really applies to any resource area, et cetera, et cetera.
But a stream, it would affect the flow.
Mm-hmm.
A pond would be a little different.
Yeah. I think we cover this elsewhere maybe, but this was just some examples that I guess aren't usually talked about.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, I think
Just-
that's good because they're more simple examples,
Yeah.
Right.
everyday examples.
Instead of keeping it broad, which
Right.
covers everything, but it doesn't teach anything, kind of. Next
Something
slide.
like extending lawns, I don't think people would see as an alteration.
So did you say that these
For example.
were alterations to in the buffer zone? We're not talking about resource area alterations.
Right. In which case, actually, the last one.
I think it was mostly buffer zones, but then I kind of added the last one just to say you can't even do work in the wetland.
I think that's a good idea though, because people often put a bridge over a brook to get to the other side or things like
Yeah.
that you wouldn't think of.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like large work in the buffer or small work in the resource,
Mm-hmm.
and if both equally important.
Mhm.
And that'll probably change as we do presentations, getting people's questions.
Yeah. I'm looking at the shed part of it, and I'm thinking, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it doesn't apply to somebody who's building a shed, deck, or pool in an upland area. It's only
In a buffer zone,
in a buffer zone at this point.
right.
Mm.
But does it say that in here somewhere?
We do mention the shed in the exemptions part.
Okay.
I wonder, should that be included in, should the term buffer zone be included here?
I think that would be a good idea. Yeah.
Buffer zone or resource area?
Mm-hmm.
That's not how we spell it. We can fix that stuff elsewhere. But we can fix that if we need to.
I think we just need to figure out how we say this. Or do we want to say
I think it's more to open up conversation, probably
right?
too, in the meetings.
I think it might be worth combining the two parenthetics
Mhm.
and talk about some examples affecting
You know,
either buffer zone or resource area.
mm, but you know, now you're saying you're gonna regulate the guy cutting a tree or removing vegetation from his yard because it's in the resource, because it's in a buffer zone?
Well,
That might be something you cover, like Judy's saying, when you present it.
right, because it's not
You
just, it's
can
not
say that,
trimming
but you
height,
can,
but you
but-
can't clear cut the vegetation.
right.
And so it would be a further explanation.
Yeah, I think you need something like that. That one would hit a lot of people.
Right, I think so too.
And
You can do
I
maintenance
wonder,
of your yard. We're
Right.
not regulating that.
yeah, but you're creaching up,
What you
you're
can't do
creaching,
is go decide you want to extend your yard by another 50 feet
yeah,
into the buffer area.
Yeah.
And cut down all the vegetation and the
Right,
trees.
exactly.
So I
And
think
that's
that opens up the conversation where you can,
Right.
educate people on this is,
Yeah.
mm,
because that's a case where you can't remove the vegetation even in the buffer, right?
I mean, you
Or,
DEP recognizes that you can at least do maintenance of your
Mhm.
existing lawn and yard,
yeah.
and we should be no more rigorous than that here.
yeah, but they're not talking about,
Buffer,
um, buffer, yeah. That they were
right.
talking about buffer?
No,
Oh, they weren't, okay.
no. I mean, I think we
I
need to be
mean,
clear
that's like,
that we're not trying to regulate people,
mm,
and maybe the answer is remove um, cutting trees and removing vegetation in excess of normal landscape maintenance.
Yeah, besides normal maintenance.
Yeah.
mm, okay. I'm
And I
not
think
thinking.
even from there, you might get questions or you might add on to that as you
Yeah,
talk about it.
besides or
I
beyond
think that
normal
needs, I
maintenance.
think that needs some work, my opinion.
I think just
I
for the
know,
sake of the words, I think just removing vegetation is enough to at least get it on the right track. And nothing you can say here will give you a full picture of what you can and can't do.
what
Mhm.
does the definition of alteration in the regulations?
Well, our bylaw,
Oh yeah, pull up the bylaw. It covers a lot from what I remember.
alteration is a rather, we're basically fill, no person shall remove, fill, dredge, build upon, degrade, discharge into, or otherwise alter the following resource areas.
Does this definition apply just to these changes you're making, or?
Term alter shall include, and we've got
No, but
letters
so,
A through L.
but this is different than what the regulations have,
Yeah,
right?
this is for the bylaw.
This
This
is
is
the
for the
bylaw.
bylaw.
We
So,
haven't written regulations yet, Jimmy. We got another whole set of tasks ahead of us.
I think it doesn't need to say destruction of plant life because maybe just removal. Destruction really elicits more like grinding it up or, I think that's the wrong word choice.
Yeah, it does
And
say
then-
destruction in the Wetlands Protection Act.
Yeah, I think for the bylaw, you may want to have a little different, a little
Well,
gentler.
I mean, wouldn't destruction of plant life mean that someone could like mow their grass because they're not destroying the grass, they're just trimming it?
Yeah.
And therefore,
Well, it sounds like destruction, you almost think of something that's already been removed, like the tree limbs or
mm,
plants,
Well,
kind of.
And someone might say, I removed it, I didn't just, I think just it's the word choice that I don't, I know it's in the act, but I don't agree with
what
it.
would you suggest? Removal?
Yeah, I mean, you could say, I think you need to have things that elicit a conversation starter. And I think destructions gives it a negative connotation.
mm,
And it makes it seem much more drastic than what it actually is.
mm,
Where it's simple as, digging up all the vegetation or yanking it all out. Destruction to me, sounds like coming in with the backhoe and taking it out.
plus we don't want to have Ethan out there every
what
5
about
minutes.
destruction of habitat?
What's that?
What about destruction of habitat?
Well, we don't want to destruct
I think
habitat.
that's a little
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Removal might just be the word we're looking for.
Mhm. Yeah. I think I agree with Judy though, because I think, I don't know, I think somewhere.
I could live with removal.
Which one is, yeah, just take out removal, that's what you're saying? Just
No,
take
I'm
removal?
suggesting we substitute removal for the word destruction.
Mhm.
Oh, removal of plant life, including cutting of trees. And this is work in the buffer zone.
This is in the buffer zone.
That's, something, these environments, these aren't like a stationary thing. These are like evolving as time goes by. So,
Sure.
What I
So-
like about what I like about removal is that, like reading this, I would think, okay, I can remove the invasive species,
yeah,
but I'm not removing everything so that I'm just leaving like soil
yeah.
there.
But Jennifer, what if they want to take out some invasive plant or something, and would that stop them from taking it out?
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, I think, ideally if they, the smart thing to do would be to replace it with like something because otherwise you'll just get more invasives
Mhm.
in the same spot. But you know, when there's no kind of net change in plants, you're just changing what's actually there from this to that.
Yeah, you're saying substitute, almost like a
Yeah,
substitute.
right. I wouldn't, I think we could let that slide as not removal,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
more just altering the composition of what's there.
Yeah, I
And
mean, the issue is you want wherever possible to deal with the invasives.
You know what? Can't we have something in here that says the intent of this section is to do this?
Well,
And
this definition is only referring to activities essentially taken to, upon, within, or affecting resource areas. So it wouldn't be an alteration like what you're saying if you're just removing invasive plants.
Jimmy, the first section of the proposed bylaw is purpose.
okay, I like intent, but purpose is okay.
And
Oh, I say it there. Yeah. Oops. Yeah, protect the wetlands.
Can I ask, under the purpose section, what is meant by the wildlife? I mean, how is that going to be protected? The wildlife habitat, yes, but the wildlife, I don't see how that's going to be protected by the commission. Because what I think of is when we had the conversation about the beaver management policy, and it was brought up that Ethan could make a determination on whether the beavers should be trapped. I don't think that's something that the commission wants to get into. I mean, I don't know how else what you mean by you're going to protect the actual wildlife.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the
Because the
habitat
person
is
can-
mostly
Right,
Habitat is what we would be looking to
right,
protect because, I mean, the state licenses people to hunt certain types of wildlife.
right. But how would the commission actually protect the physical wildlife?
I'm not necessarily suggesting we run out and stand in front of people. So
yeah. I think we
I
protect the
think I
wildlife.
think you make a good point, Judy.
Yeah.
The
We
word
protect the
wildlife
wildlife
probably
through the habitat.
I'm not sure we can.
I don't think so. And recreation, how would that be protected?
Well, by preserving open space.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But passive recreation,
Well,
but that's not part of the Wetlands Protection Act, what you're doing here, though.
but you're not saying in the purpose about open
protect the
space.
wetlands, water resources, and contiguous land areas of the town by controlling activities deemed to have a significant effect on the wetlands values, including not limited to the following, and recreation in wetlands. Yeah, I would be okay with that.
But in the first line, it says protect wetlands, water resources, and contiguous land areas of the town of Wakefield.
Yeah.
Shouldn't that say contiguous jurisdictional land areas? Because you don't have any control over just open areas. So there could be contiguous land areas that are upland that aren't jurisdictional.
God, this is
Right, but
hard.
I think the section jurisdiction kind of narrows, is
Yeah,
what
it
does
does.
that narrowing.
Yeah, our jurisdiction is defined below.
Right, but adding that, I think, kind of
Hmm.
muddies it.
I think at least removing the wildlife would be a good
Yeah, I agree.
start.
Yeah. I would leave recreation where it is, though. I mean, that is a wetland value.
And
Recreation?
the rare species habitat and plant habitat,
Mm-hmm.
that's already covered under the Wetlands Protection Act. So what,
Well, all of this is.
yeah, I know, but I
think
mean,
And the difference is we're also stepping into buffer areas.
yeah,
And we're applying this to isolated wetlands and vernal
Yeah.
pools. And I think
That's one of
recreation invites the public to, weigh in and participate. I'm thinking about the project that was behind the cemeteries.
Well, if you put that in, Jennifer, you should put, um, not recreation, but passive recreation, because it is passive recreation.
Well,
That's,
I'm not sure I would try to narrow it any further.
well, that's actually the wording that's in the act.
The act only talks about passive
No,
recreation.
it's the Wetlands Protection Act, but it includes passive recreation. Doesn't, you can't put soccer fields out there and stuff like that. You can put trails, but
What about going canoeing in a wetland?
you probably could. If you weren't gonna alter, yeah, why wouldn't you be able to? I don't know, maybe you can't.
I guess that's
Well,
not protecting
recreation
the
is a
wetland that
wetland
much.
value, so that's why I'm suggesting we just leave it as recreation because kayaking or canoeing in the wetland is not passive.
Canoeing isn't passive,
Hmm?
then it wouldn't be included.
I think with like canoeing, that's not exactly protecting the wetland. That's why active recreation, like Jim is saying, might not be included because there's risks to affecting the wetland.
Say that again?
Like with active recreation,
Yeah,
canoeing, that's doesn't provide any benefit to the wetlands. Something like passive recreation might provide benefit.
okay, so, well, what I'm saying is it probably should say passive recreation. What are you saying?
Same thing.
Okay,
I was sort of wondering what about active recreation is it that we wouldn't want to include?
Well, I mean, seems to me we can't exclude public access to bodies of water, can we?
No,
We don't have that ability, and that includes wetlands.
And we're not constrained by the Wetlands Protection Act with this. I mean, some, this is the section where towns add their own interest. I mean, some even include sort of cultural and historical protections or,
Right.
values, which I also don't think, protect or
I would
enhance the wetlands.
rather,
well,
I
I
mean,
know
this
that,
is this is talking about significant impact upon wetland values, including but not limited to, and one of those wetland values is recreation. I would
if
not narrow it down to simply passive recreation, but leave it
if
open
you
as,
read the act, though, if you read the Conservation Act, I think I got the wrong wording in there. But it tells you right there, it's open space of passive recreation.
well,
And that was the way that they got the land over in Greenwood there was because they wanted to put soccer fields. They took it for soccer fields. We have
Oh,
tried
I
to get it
see.
for passive recreation. They wouldn't give it to us. They said, we're gonna use this for soccer fields. So there's a big difference there.
So, Jimmy, are you saying that you think it's more protective to say passive recreation?
I think it's more protective to go passive recreation. And I think it's in line with what the original intent was.
Because you think that there would be a circumstance in which otherwise it might get taken to build a.
Yeah, I mean, the way we're heading now, we've got trails started out there. That's a good activity for out there. You can do snowboard, snow skiing, or I don't know. There's all kinds of activities that they call passive recreation. I know that all I know for sure is that the sports stuff doesn't apply. That you can't use soccer, baseball, football as a reason to take the property or put restrictions on it. And that's right, and you can read it right in the, I don't know which chapter it is, but it's in the state regulation. I had it somewhere here.
Are you saying that active recreation almost takes priority to wetlands in the way that it's like beyond our protection?
I think that the passive recreation is more restrictive than active regulation because it's going to limit what you can do out there.
Well,
Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm making sense right
Yeah.
now.
I think what you're saying is we want to see these areas limited to passive recreation, but I think what this section is doing is limiting our scope
Yeah.
for what we're allowed to sort of opine upon.
All right.
can we
Okay.
go in jurisdiction? I thought it was under resource areas, it has perennial stream, Riverbrook Creek. Stream is all of those in the act, so you wouldn't need them all spelled out. And it's the same for freshwater wetland. Marsh, wet meadow, bog, swamp, those are all freshwater wetlands. So you wouldn't need to identify everyone.
I'm in favor of leaving them. I think it makes it more descriptive for people to understand, what to be looking for when deciding whether to submit an NOI. And I think most towns do use this language where they really go into a list and they list it out.
mhm. I'm inclined to agree with you, John.
And I think a lot of these line up with the terminology of mass gifts, which, is another way people may try to figure out, a starting point for figuring out whether they need to submit an NOI. So they'll see those terms and say, okay, that's on the list.
Well, are these in here because they're more restrictive? Is that why we're doing that? Because wildlife,
But this list
yeah.
is supposed to be a list of wetland values.
Oh, okay,
At least that's how I read this text.
okay.
Yeah, this is kind of keeping it vague. It doesn't exactly limit anything, just tells you the scope of what it comes to follow.
These are the reasons why wetlands are important,
Okay. All
without
right.
going into the rather broad kinds of textual language that we might otherwise.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, should we go back to the presentation?
Sure. Flooding. I added this slide because we talked about how much of an impact or how important flooding is in relation to a lot of the projects we look at. So
I think we talked last time about perhaps, so I'm looking at slide number 5 of the current presentation, why are wetlands and their buffers important? And I thought we talked about expanding each one of these reasons into its own slide, like having a slide on each one, which is basically sort of the persuasive part of the presentation. Why does this matter? And I think flooding would be one of those. Do you
Well, I
all
think
remember having that?
that's what this slide, which is slide 6. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure we need both 5 and 6.
I think maybe, like you're saying, Jennifer, the flooding part could go after this, and then
Mm-hmm.
maybe we talk about erosion control or something for another slide,
Okay.
or just expanding on any of these, maybe as they come up in our discussions with other groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily have to do every single one, but the ones that are going to be most impactful in terms of people appreciating the benefits of the bylaw.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would agree with moving flooding up to up where you suggest.
Yeah. And then we could expand on flooding more if we want to.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we need that slide with those pink bars across
This
that.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it's all covered under this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the last point about a third of mass wetlands have been destroyed.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah. But
Yeah. I'll move it.
yeah, I would sort of set that one aside for now.
Yeah, I put all the deleted slides like down here so we can always
Okay.
reference them later.
Okay. This is still a very long presentation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the only other change was the FAQs. So Eleanor had mentioned some questions that she had heard. So this is one that we could brainstorm. I mean, I'll probably add to this over the course of the next week or two.
Mhm.
And then some questions about the fees. And I had some more info on the next slide as well if you wanted to get more in depth in that.
Yeah, I'd want to edit that in the case of project only applies to the bylaw. You want to reverse the order. It's in the case of the bylaw, only the bylaw applies to a project.
Yeah.
And then an NOI fee would
Mhm. It's good.
We want to say something here about if people are uncertain whether they need to submit an NOI, the normal process would be that they would talk with you, Ethan, right? And you would go out and visit the site, and that doesn't cost them anything, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So
Something like you could consult with the commission before filing an official permit.
Yeah.
yeah, to determine if an NOI is necessary.
Maybe I'll address this to people. Discuss.
Or the conservation agent.
I would just put agent because they'd have to come to a meeting.
Yeah, that gets much more complicated
Yeah.
with the conservation agent.
Why is that, Judy? What does that do?
They
In
want
order
to
to
talk.
discuss it with the commission, they'd have to come to a meeting. It would have to be at a public meeting.
Yeah,
Okay.
far more
Like
burdensome.
simple, maybe.
And then the commission would say, Ethan, go out and make a site visit.
Right. I think I'd suggest using the word consult rather than discuss.
Hmm.
I was trying to avoid it because I was thinking of consultants, like the applicants.
Yeah, well,
Or just talk with.
Confer. How about confer?
confer.
That's a nice word.
Okay.
All right.
And then this slide just had another breakdown of fees, kind of just for our info, but we can weave it in or take it out.
That's far more detailed than I think we really want in this presentation, isn't
Yeah.
it?
But
This one was more so for us.
Yeah,
the
I
NOI
mean,
would also include notice to abutters. That's an added fee.
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, this is
Yeah. I'll leave it
I
aside
wouldn't put,
for our
yeah.
info, but
Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
good point.
Yeah, that's a great slide to have if somebody in sort of your extras or if someone has a question, you can say, oh, I have a slide on that.
Yeah. And we can always just leave it at the end of the presentation
In
and
the
down
deleted
if it comes
slides.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is another question we got.
Mm-hmm. It's okay.
And then this last question I didn't receive, but I figured it was one that would come up considering our discussions too.
Yeah.
Yep. Worth.
And that was the last of it. That's all I had.
And
I
then-
think people will be interested in how it interacts with or applies to the 40A and 40B projects.
Well, say that again, Jeff?
I think the answer, Jennifer, is 40A and 40B override the local bylaw, don't they?
I don't think 40A, the MBTA's community, MBTA.
Mhm.
Okay, no,
That does
40B,
40B, you can't apply the local bylaws.
right. When we encountered the project on North Avenue, which came in as a 40B project, because we didn't have a bylaw, we could review that project under the state's wetland law, under the WPA.
Mhm.
Right,
And
you
the
are,
bylaw,
right, it doesn't exempt that, it would only exempt a bylaw.
right.
Yep.
It would set aside any bylaw. All you'd be left with is WPA.
Right.
I just duplicated this slide, so edit this.
Okay.
And is that 40B projects are exempt from local bylaws.
Yes.
But yeah, right, but not WPA.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. And then, sorry, I didn't catch what the 40A.
That's still,
40A is,
sorry.
yeah. 40A is the MBTA Communities Act,
Mm-hmm.
which essentially governs zoning of properties in areas of the town that the town has already defined. I don't think that
Okay.
40A isn't really relevant here, is it?
Oh, okay. So this would apply to 40A as anywhere else.
Yeah, I don't think 40A really plays with what we're doing. Okay, what do we
And
have for sources, Ethan? I'm just curious about that one. Okay,
most of it was from our bylaw itself.
mm-hmm, okay. Um, yeah,
It's kind of just a presentation of our bylaw plus a
right.
couple.
No,
additional
it's
sheets.
actually, it's a pretty comprehensive presentation. I wonder how much of it we want to use when we actually do some of these public meetings and presentations, because I don't think we can use the whole. I mean, if you figure a minute and a half a slide, that's a lot of time that we'd be talking.
How many slides do you have?
I count 38.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you could start with basic, what is the bylaw? What's the purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And then pull out the slides based on what questions are elicited. See where people's
Mhm.
interests are, rather than going through every single slide. Give them the basics and then see what they want to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we cut this down next meeting with a fresh set of eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Something
then
like
have
this
all,
slide
Why don't you,
could be on the side.
circulate it to us again, Ethan, now that we've gone through it tonight. And
and
then,
then you could have the other slides in a queue. If someone asks, well,
Yeah.
let me see what an example of a wetland is, or
Mm.
then you'd have something at the ready to pull out.
yep.
So you wouldn't be flooding them with information.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then you could say, have a link. Here's the slide packet of all the slides. And if
Yeah.
you have any questions, you can follow up. So they could review them on their own time and kind of do their own research.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. And like these ones, we'll remove the bank after discussing it, so that'll shorten it a little bit.
That's true.
But yeah. Okay.
And so these slides that we talked about elaborating on like why vote for the bylaw, I'm happy to do those. It would just be a handful. It just expand on what's already there.
I think that's important to have here.
Mm-hmm. Like part of the FAQ one.
Well,
Yeah,
I
just-
think yeah, why is it important? Right, and yeah, I do think towards the end. I don't know if I would consider that an FAQ, but yeah, towards the end.
Yeah. I do think we need to say something about why is this an important thing to do.
I'll just remove this and then
Yeah.
get a clean slate.
So what would you add to that, Jennifer? What do you think some good bullet points would be?
Well, I mean, I think the flooding would go under here. Protecting habitat. We can refer to, there was the Wakefield Vision 2030, where that was the most highly endorsed item, was people want to protect and conserve open space. Yeah, 3 or 4 things. I mean, I think they're kind of throughout, but either expanding on them or just making sure to make sure that they're very prominent in the presentation.
Yeah, I think it's important that we get those points in there because this is a sales pitch. We have essentially one shot at making that pitch.
And you also may want to put some more thought into the stream setback bylaw because that could come into the discussion as well.
Maybe I'll put together or find some information. I'll send it out this week so we can refresh ourselves with that.
Okay. That could be helpful. Yes, thanks.
Okay. So it sounds like we're going to be, well, someone's going to be presenting this at the planning board meeting on July 8th, and I would definitely love to attend. I know we can't deliberate, but it seems like we should all be able to go if we
I
want
think
to.
You can
as
speak.
many of us as want to attend can attend.
Yeah, and you can speak. You just have to say you're not speaking for the commission
Okay.
Right.
as a resident.
And I like the idea of, the public hearing, inviting all the groups to that. And I guess I want to put out there to consider maybe having a second public hearing just for anyone who can't attend the first one, or if people attend the first one, they go home and think about it.
Yeah, I think you'd probably have to wait until early fall. You'll have that one and then give you guys time at, your August meeting to fine tune things. And then kind of a finalizing in the fall.
So have a meeting with, it'll be an open meeting,
Yes,
but specifically invite the various advocacy groups to
Yeah.
participate
yes, Yep.
in early August. And then there'd be a second meeting towards the end of the summer or in September
and that will be really finalizing
to finish,
your presentation for town meeting. Yeah.
right. But do you think, I mean, this feels like a very long presentation to make a town meeting.
Yeah, that
Well,
one would
you
definitely
limit
be
to 15 minutes, so there's that.
Okay. So we definitely have to do some editing here.
Yeah, I think it's just, like Jennifer said, pulling out the most important points.
Salient points here, yes.
Yeah.
And you know what I might do, Ethan, is just start, if it were me, I would start to just give the presentation as is. Some slides might be like 10 seconds. You just say, here's the point, move on. And other slides are going to take longer, and you might just make note of that and see how long it takes to run through.
Is Ethan making the presentation at town meeting, or is it someone on the commission?
Yeah,
I thought it was the commission itself.
I'm assuming it's going to be either me or one of the other commissioners.
Okay, it's gonna.
When is town meeting?
November. It's usually the Saturday before Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's a terrible time.
I know, and it's at 8 o'clock in the morning.
I have.
Unless they change it. There'll be a new town administrator, so that could change.
Oh, when does that process get wrapped up?
They are anticipating interviews at the end of July. So I would think by maybe October, they'll have someone, by the time that person gets notice and, I'm guessing.
So we'll have a brand new town manager for the fall town meeting.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
That'll be exciting.
I mean,
that's not the right word, but
do you think it'll be a highly attended one, Judy, with all of the other bylaw changes?
That's right. There's all the other bylaws coming up, aren't there?
Yeah, well, that's more like editing of the current bylaw.
Yeah.
A recodification of the zoning bylaw.
Right.
I don't know. It's hard to say. I think the nighttime one is more highly attended. I think it's an easy one for people. Only because 8 o'clock, they have childcare at both of them, but I think, just from my experience going, the ones at night have been better attended.
Okay. So we'll wait to see some revisions and a document from you, Ethan, on this.
Yep.
In the next little bit, so we can plow through it and try to make sense out of it and be prepared to condense it some in our next meeting at the first meeting in July.
Mhm.
Okay. Do we have anything else to discuss tonight? There's one other item I'll just let you know about the first meeting in July. I sent it on to Ethan today. The town's got a request from a homeowner on Foster's Way wanting to buy a parcel of town-owned land adjacent to their property. So they'll be coming up next meeting,
Mhm.
and we'll have
Do you
to.
know what, is that the one that abuts Payon Boulevard? Is it that area?
This one appears to abut back up from Foster's Way to the interstate, 12895, from the simple sketch map that they provided.
Do you know if it's tax title?
Town has tax title, yes.
Yep.
Oh, so it is a tax title.
Pardon?
Yes. It's the one where they send this out to all the departments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See if anyone's interested. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to make up our mind if this is something we want to have. Supposedly, the folks who want to buy it are saying that they would keep it in conservation.
Mhm.
I don't
But
know.
yeah, you'd need more information on,
Right.
because if they turn around and sold it, if it wasn't in a conservation restriction, then,
Mhm.
I mean, it's all floodplain, most of that area.
Yeah.
But there had been, I don't know, Paul, if you were on the commission at the time, there was a proposal in that area for development. There's a large parcel in the middle of Payon that's owned by one person.
No, I don't think I was at all
Okay, it ended
involved.
up getting, I think, withdrawn, but it's just something to think about.
And this just came through today, so we have some time to look at it next meeting.
Yeah.
Do you have an address for that?
That's,
Let me get it on my. You sent it this afternoon, Ethan. I've got it here.
Yeah. How about I'll send it around tomorrow, and then
Yeah.
mhm.
I think it was the homeowner that lives there. It's just the parcel
Yeah.
attached to theirs.
Okay.
You know what I might be a good thing to think about is doing some type of a trial run with some of the more complicated things to see. Man, I'm just worried about people coming up and asking questions we can't answer, or if it was, if it was a complicated thing to do. But something to think about.
Mhm.
I wouldn't want to just don't want to get caught not being able to answer responsibly.
Do you mean like a practice run of a
The
presentation?
practice run, yeah.
I think that's a good idea, Jimmy.
What kind of complicated questions do you think would come up, though?
I don't know. I think something to do with flooding is going to come up.
Right,
Anything-
right. I think it's more just sticking to the basics of flood storage,
Okay.
providing an area, just basic, providing an area for the water to pool. Basics like that.
Mm.
The culvert, you just.
I was thinking more like,
Boundaries, neighborhood.
my land floods this high. How come?
Yeah, I don't think a dry run is a bad idea, but I think the forums are a good dry run for it. I think that's probably the purpose of the forums too, is to kind of make a presentation and see what questions you get, because people that will attend the forums might have questions that will be similar to someone who just has one at a town meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is just, you have to be able to think on your feet and just try to come up with the best answer you can.
Well, that would probably do about the same thing. I think that's probably a better idea. What you just said, Judy, because it gives you a couple of chances at covering all the bases.
Mhm.
Right, right.
Yeah. I do think it's essential we do a dry run or two.
But what do you mean by dry run?
Talk
I'm
through this
thinking the dry run
application.
would be going to these forum or
Right.
hosting these forums.
Right. So the one in the fall could be the dry run at the forum. You could make the presentation, shorten it to 5 minutes or 7 minutes, and then start the forum after that and
Mm,
see how people react to it.
yeah,
What do you think about using one of these meetings? We have another meeting before before
I
the 8th.
I think it would be useful.
Yeah,
I,
and it would.
I think it's more useful to have an audience that's, I mean, it's like a biased audience doing it at the commission. If you do it at a forum, you're going to elicit other questions.
Mhm.
I don't think it adds any more value doing it at the commission.
And maybe once we start doing this outreach, I might be hearing questions just day to day
Right.
from owners,
Well, that's an idea.
Okay.
kind of like I already do now.
Mhm.
All
But I
right.
think once we get it started, it'll sort itself out.
Mm. Okay.
Okay. Do we have anything else to discuss tonight?
No,
All right. Then I think we need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I was waiting for you, Jennifer.
Okay.
I'll second it.
All right. All in favor? Jennifer,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
See you
Yeah.
in 2 weeks.
Great job.
Yeah.